So if you have a horse and you need to throw up some temporary fencing, this is a very, very good option. We just bought this property. It's 30 acres. This is about following that line, going over down and around and over there and over. Not going quite to the road because you never really want to do that. Cutting just in front of this gravel and coming straight out the barn. It's about a 3-acre plot. Looking it up to put in a fence, and not even a very good fence. So assuming we're going to go ahead and put in corner posts and bracing, and putting up corner posts and bracing for every gate that I want to put in here, that plus these rods, and these are just fiberglass rods, 3/8 inch, 6 foot tall. These are $1.80 a piece, and then you buy the insulators. These are about $3 for a pack of 25. To do this fencing for this 3-acre paddock was going to be about $5,000. To do the fencing that I really want is $7,000 or $8,000. If you did pure board fencing, you're talking about a lot, and that's just for 3 acres. I did have my horses in this ring for about a week when we first moved here, while we were getting all of that set up. And we didn't have it connected to the barn like we do now, but we had just this little ring, and we had it out there, and we moved it around. We had to move it at minimum every 2 days because they would just destroy it. The problem with moving these, though, and as cheap as these are, was that one, you can really only put these in a circle, and that's because these clips don't do too great holding this on. So what you run into is, like, the second you move it, or a good tug or a good wind, and it just goes boop and does that. My horses will stay behind an electric fence as long as it gives a nice little zap, and I think most horses will. You have some horses who just absolutely won't. I also know of horses who had a hard time with electric fences because they would just barrel through it before they could get zapped. But if you teach them, you walk them up to it slowly, and you force them to get zapped by it, they'll usually learn to stay behind it. But so moving this around was a pain in the butt, because you have to, like, pull it up, move it in, stick it, push it into the ground a little bit, and do that about 1,000 times to move this over just one circle. And then of course you had where it would come around like this, and then you had all this grass that wasn't getting touched. So it was pretty limiting. It took me probably a half hour to 45 minutes just to move this tiny little pen. So we saw something on Pinterest where they used PVC pipes and plastic Christmas tree bases. Now, you might be able to pick those up pretty cheap after the holidays, but it is currently September. We bought this stuff in August, so tree stuff would be really expensive right now. These buckets are $3 at Walmart, $2.96 actually. We went to every place that sold 3-gallon buckets. Harbor Freight, Home Depot, Tractor Supply, Lowe's. We went everywhere, and these were by far the cheapest. And the cool thing is you can get them in a few different colors: yellow, green, white, and blue. And they're just ordinary 5-gallon buckets. You can get them from bakeries and stuff a lot of times for like $1, but we needed 40 of them. So the buckets were 40 times $2.96 times whatever taxes. And then these are just 1-inch PVC pipes. And they come in a 10-foot length. And when you buy 10 or more, you get them for $3.33 a pole. And then they went ahead and cut them right in half for us, so they're all 5 feet tall, which Elsa here is about 18 hands, and you can see that this wire is plenty tall enough. I drilled all the wire about an inch down from the top. Now Eclipse there, if she wanted to, she could duck under the top wire, but 2 wires keeps her in. I did initially drill a lot more holes to put in more wire if I needed to or if I wanted to. So we could put another wire there, we could put another wire there, and then tape there. That was probably the hardest thing to do about this whole fence, is all the drilling. I had to switch the battery like 10 times. And what I did is I got like 2 poles and I measured them out exactly, drew my lines across them, and I did that. Then I would line the 2 up, put a 3rd one on the back because you need 2 points to make sure you're going in a properly straight line. And then it just, you know, zoop, zoop, zoop down each and every pole. Draw the lines down one pole, throw it off to the side, grab another, replace, repeat. And then after that, I needed to find a good way to draw a line straight down the middle so that all my holes were actually in a line. It took a while, but well worth it. And then of course, 1 spool of this wire from Tractor Supply, this electric twine, went around this twice and actually still had about a good 150 feet or so. And these are all spaced 15 feet apart, so you got a good distance. So this is, when I initially set it up, we set it up here, and you can see the line. This is where it first was. This is where I had my circles, and I just went ahead, even though we had already done like 3 that way and started to go that way with the circles. I put it back over this so I could get them to even it up with their eating. And there's a good distribution of poop too. It's pretty spread out. So when I set it up the first time, I made sure it was absolutely perfect. What I did is I got 2 pieces of tie down straps that we use for our truck when we get hay, and I hooked one there and I drug it out, and it was 10 feet. Tied the next one on, stretched it out, and where 15 feet was is where I tied a knot in it. And then all I had to do was hook it there and pull it out, and wherever the knot was is where I put the pole. So the first time I made sure it was absolutely perfect. It took a while. It was a bit of a pain in the butt. You're definitely going to want 2 people to set it up the first time, because once you get around that corner, it starts to become difficult, and once you get to the 3rd corner, it absolutely does not want to pull through. So it helps to have 2 people. And so the first time we set it up, it was 150 by 150. And you can see that's a pretty nice size space. And the really cool thing about these, and what we did is we concreted the poles in. So it took 12 bags of concrete to make it about 4 inches deep, I'd say. And we toyed with the idea of using just topsoil or some other cheap thing from some big garden store where you can buy it in bulk. But then that would have required a tarp, and tarps are like $80, and we didn't have that money. So we just went with the concrete. And it does really well. They can tip over kind of easily, but because it's electrified, the horses won't touch the poles at all. So I don't have to worry about them tipping it over. And the wind hasn't tipped it over yet, even when it's sitting on a hill here. So it's doing really, really well. I moved it for the first time on Monday. Was it this Monday? Yeah, I think. Yeah, this Monday. I made it longer so it would go all the way back to the weeds in the trees back there. And it took me about 2 hours to move it. It's still difficult to move because you still have to go and grab all the buckets, scoot them in a little bit, scoot everything down, go over, grab the buckets, scoot them more, and then you have to scoot these more. And then, I mean, this bucket was only right here. but I had to take everything and turn it. And it was 40 buckets, and it took quite a while to do. But the really awesome thing about this, you know, you just do it on the weekend, and with these 2 horses, I probably won't have to move it for 2 weeks. I still won't get a good say in that because Elsa went lame and was locked up in a little barn lot up until yesterday. So maybe the next time I move it, I'll be able to say for sure. This grass isn't particularly grown out, but it's probably a good 8 to 10 inches tall. You can see it's muddy right here, but that's mostly because since Elsa was over there, Eclipse sat right here all week and didn't really go anywhere out there. But that'll heal up on its own, and it looks muddy today because it rained today. But I mean, this is, I highly recommend it. The wire doesn't need to be super taut. You know, if your terrain fluctuates, it can actually kind of really screw with it. I actually have one more bucket in the back than I do in the front, but they're still spaced the same. And it's mostly due to the hill that it sits on now. I don't really know. It was really weird to try and work out, but if I want to, I can make this a big old circle. I can, you know, come down there and then come this way the next time to like square it up. It's really cool that way. The only thing I didn't think of is that obviously I don't want to have a 15-foot opening when I want to take one horse out. And because they will absolutely definitely try to run through. When we first set up the round one with just these, and we had them all about 12 feet apart. And when I moved it 2 days later, I scooted 2 of the poles really close together to make a smaller gate, because every time I would try to pull one horse out, sure enough, the other would try to come through. So I had to steal one of these poles and I just stick it in the ground, and what I do is I tie it right here, and I have it tied a loop right here, and then obviously, you know, tie that on, and that way when I take this off, it doesn't slacken down the whole fence line and down and around and really screw everything up. Stays nice and tight. I have this tied together with just a line. It works perfectly fine that way, and I have that done across here 3 times. You don't need it. You only need it once to be tied down and across. I have it once here, which is the last bucket pole. I have it once there, which is the first bucket pole, and I actually have it once in the middle back there. And the reason I kind of did that is because, as you see here, we're actually tied at the end. From the electrifier, we're tied at the end. And if I only had it tied there, this electric current would have to go all the way down and around and back, and then come up and go up there, and then come all the way back and around to get up here. So this way, it doesn't matter where I tie, it's gonna pretty much immediately go to both wires. And then I have one in the middle just in case, and it also lets me know, like, where's 20 poles, where's my middle. This was a copper rod from Tractor Supply. I would have gone with the stainless steel, but the stainless steel was 8 feet long and I only needed a 6-foot pole, and it was more expensive. Tractor Supply is a really expensive place to buy a grounding rod. I wouldn't suggest buying from there if you don't have to. I did it because I needed it and it was on hand. I do kind of plan to check out Home Depot and stuff, because right now that wire is not electrified, and there's really no good way for me to electrify that one and this one currently. So what we're going to do is we're going to get another grounding rod, drive it in over there somewhere, and then all I have to do when I move the horses between the two for one reason or another, like when I'm moving this whole big pasture, I can just untie that from there, take it over and tie it up over there, tie it to the grounding rod over there, and voila, done. This is a 5-mile solar electrifier. Well, this is not 5 miles of fencing. So, as tiny as it looks, it actually it gets a really good zap, trust me. I've nicked this wire a couple times. My husband nicked his head on it trying to water the horses and locked up his jaw. So a 5-mile electrifier has 0.1 joules. So the usual rule of thumb is that for every single joule of output your electrifier has, you need a 6-foot grounding rod all the way in the pole, or all the way in the ground. This is a 6-foot rod. We have it probably about 3 feet in, and that is more than enough grounding to shock the holy living crap out of you. If you set your fence up and you realize that maybe it's not shocking enough, just try a bit more grounding. That's usually 9 times out of 10 the issue. The last place I was at was mostly electric fence like this, and it was not this tall. It was just those tiny little step-in posts from Tractor Supply, and it was just really poorly done, and the current didn't travel more than like 20 feet down the line. The horses would stay behind it as long as there was grass in the field, but if there wasn't grass in the field, Elsa would just walk through the fence. She'd pop it right up. But as you can see, this is holding her. It's been holding her. It's doing a great job. Even Eclipse, when she's feeling ornery and finicky, and she's running around like, no, you're not allowed to catch me, she will hit her brakes hard before she even risks touching this wire. So it'll hold just about any horse as long as they know they're going to actually get zapped. So if you need a temporary fence, I mean, this fence in total, because we got that on sale for $140, maybe $50. It was on sale. 140 sounds right. So that plus all the rest of this, I mean, I honestly think we paid $350, maybe $400. And this is, I think, just under an acre. Like the whole, everything encompassed. So it's a really nice size, and I don't have to move it too often, but it's still portable enough that I can move it as often as I need to or want to. And give the horses fresh grass and really let this recover. So this was all really brown and really eaten down. There was, I mean, you can still see the line obviously, but it was much more definitive before. This is where the gate was, so it's very dirt, but actually a lot of the pasture looked like this. I'd say a lot of the pasture looked kind of like this, with you can see the dirt very easily. But now it's already growing back, and they've only been off of it for Monday, Tuesday. I'd say about 5 or 6 days, and it's growing back really well. I don't spread poop with horses, and I don't pick up poop with horses. I would consider spreading poop if I had like a pull behind thing for a 4-wheeler, but I have neither 4-wheeler or pull behind thing. But I don't pick up poop for horses. The flies here are just terrible. Long before we had the horses, like the second the horses stepped off the trailer here, they got swarmed with flies, and it didn't matter how much I sprayed them, the flies would not leave. And I think that's because of the dairy farms around here. So I'm honestly not too worried about the extra flies coming from my poop, because I already have so many flies, it just doesn't matter. And besides, good pasture management is leaving as much nutrients behind as you can. And with this system, because horses will usually like pick a spot like a corner, and that's usually where they'll poop and where they'll pee, and then they'll eat everywhere else, and then you'll have like this really lush green awesome spot that they will never ever touch. But with this system, really the only strip of land they didn't touch was this first like 20-25 feet of land from the front of the gate to, you know, right about there. and they pooped really well everywhere else. And that's really awesome because that's free fertilizer and it's spread out pretty well. If I had chickens, I'd throw them over here so they could like spread all that out and do me some more favors. But this system is working really well. And the cool thing is that once we do get a permanent, legitimate fence up, I can use these to divide the pasture. So I do plan to make this whole 3-acre lot one single pasture. And I can use these buckets to kind of strip graze them. If I want, I could just, you know, because this is where a corner will be. This whole line is actually. Actually, I guess it comes up here. But either way, you know, it'll come from the barn straight out. That swing set's got to get moved. So I could divide this section off and just let them eat over here. Or I could divide it more. Or I could even put multiple lines down, set myself up for the week, and then every 2 days go out and just take a line of buckets out and strip graze it. So these are going to become, they're going to be handy still, even when I no longer have a use for this rotating pasture. I can still use the line and the buckets for strip grazing and dividing pastures later as I need it. So I highly, highly recommend this. We're talking about putting topsoil in to fill these buckets up the rest of the way, which I may or may not do. They're pretty heavy as it is, and they're standing up just fine. And when it rains, obviously it gets stuck in there. We talked about, you know, drilling some holes in the side since we can't drill it in the bottom for drainage and planting in them. And I'm pretty sure they just eat the plants. So I think we're just going to leave them as they are. And the really awesome thing is that even though they're still riding on the sides of the PVC and my lines still show, when you start to back up, it really doesn't look that bad, and it doesn't look extremely redneck, just a little redneck. It actually looks pretty nice. So I highly, highly recommend this. Use buckets, you know, maybe get those like paint liners and make concrete forms instead of buckets, so you don't have this big huge honking thing. You just got a little that was something else we considered, but the forms themselves are all like $2.50 at minimum. Most of them were actually like $4 or $5 just for something that I was just gonna cut up after making my concrete mold. And this was our most cost-effective thing, but I really did like the idea of something a bit smaller, a bit more compact. That would have worked just as well, and I could have rolled. You know, if you've, depending on how big of a, you know, setup you need, use those tree stands. Those would roll really well too. You could even possibly use tires. I think that would work really well. I don't think it would look quite as classy, but I mean, this isn't exactly top class here either, so highly, highly recommend. I think it's a great idea. It's working out really, really well for us. I mean, it took me 2 hours to move this, but when you consider that it took me 30 minutes to 45 minutes just to move 13 of those versus 2 hours for 40 of these, and I didn't have line popping off and getting tangled up and everything else, this is definitely the better answer. I just can only really move these things on the weekend, especially with the days getting shorter. Anyhow.